Okay, we can start now.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Future of Remote Work, Driving Transformation Across Industries. I am Mohammed Ben Khaled, and I am founder and CEO of Peacock, and at the same time of OneGate.ai. And it's a pleasure to host this strategic dialogue under the umbrella of ICCD leadership, which is a platform dedicated to exploring innovative strategies for a purposes and sustainable economic future across the Islamic world and beyond. Today, we gather a private moment. Remote work has evolved from crisis-driven contingency into structural components of the global labor architecture. In an era marked by geopolitical volatility, technological acceleration, and economic shifts, remote work models have transitioned from optional to essential. This evidence is compelling. 91% of employees worldwide now prefer fully or predominantly remote arrangements, citing enhanced flexibility, reduced organizational overhead, and sustained productivity gains. Yet adoption is not uniform. While digital native sectors have embraced distributed models with agility, traditional and operationally intensive industries face unique constraints where physical presence remains integral to core value creation. Even here, however, digital transformation is paving the way of hybrid innovation and context-aware flexibility. In my view, remote work is not merely a change of location. It is a catalyst for systemic reinvention. It compels organizations to rethink workflows, reimagine culture, and also rebuild infrastructure, not for the office of yesterday, but for the borderless, intelligent, human-centric enterprise of tomorrow. To explore this transformation in depth, I am honored today to be joined by three distinguished thought leaders: Mr. Farhan Masood, founder, president, and chief AI officer of Solo Insights Inc., Mr. Radu Andrian, director of AI at Health AI, the global agency for responsible AI in health, and Mr. Mohammed Hussein, Chief Innovation Officer at Regent Business School. Collectively, they offer a powerful convergence of academic depth, hands-in on leadership experience and domain-specific expertise, ensuring that today's dialogue is not only insightful but transformative. Thank you for being here, and let us begin. So our first distinguished speaker is Mr. Farhan Masood, founder, president, and chief AI officer of Solo Insights Inc., and the architect behind CloudGate, the cloud-native platform that unifies physical and digital identity, access, and compliance for modern enterprises, including 14 Fortune 100 companies across healthcare, financial services, energy, and government. For over 2 decades, Mr. Masood has solved the problems organizations don't yet know they have, starting with his pioneering work leading in the Dubai e-government program, where he unified 127 government services into a single mobile-first platform. Welcome, Mr. Farhan Masood, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Mr. Ben Khaled, and thank you to Islamic Chamber of Commerce and Development for convening this conversation. It is an honor to share this panel with such distinguished colleagues from the industry. So we actually look at, this may sound like an unusual lens for a conversation about remote work, but I would argue it is exactly the right one, because remote work didn't eliminate the workplace, it multiplied it. So if we look at every home office, every co-working space, every site an employee badges into is now part of the enterprise. And I've lived this question personally. I run an American company, It was Engineering Heartbeats in Lahore. I'm visiting Lahore right now, so just arrived 2 days ago. So our company has been a distributed cross-border organization since before 2020, made it fashionable. So I want to speak today both as the builder of workplace technology and as a practitioner of remote work across continents. So let me start where I believe we actually are, because the headlines are misleading in both directions. The first truth is that the experiment is over and the hybrid won. So the debate of 2020 to 2023, fully remote versus fully in office, has largely settled into a hybrid equilibrium across most knowledge industries. Most large enterprises now operate some structured mix. They're anchored days in office, flexible days everywhere. The interesting question is no longer whether people work remotely. It is how well organizations have rebuilt themselves around this reality. And honestly, most of them have not. Many companies bolted video calls into an office era operating model and call it transformation, which is not. The second truth is the conversation has moved from location to trust. When your workforce is distributed, you can no longer manage by line of sight. You manage by outcomes, by access, and by verification. So identity has become the new parameter. 5 years ago, the enterprise, and by, but 5 years ago, the parameter was the firewall and the front door. Today, the parameter is the person. It's the individual who they claim to be. Are they entitled to this resource at this moment from this place? Every industry, from pharmaceuticals to banking to government, is wrestling with that same question. And third, the last one, the opportunity side. And this is the part I feel most strongly about for this audience. Remote work is the largest redistribution of economic opportunity in my lifetime. The talent has always been distributed evenly around the world. Opportunity has not. So the remote work done properly lets a brilliant engineer in Karachi, Cairo, Jakarta, or Casablanca contribute to the global economy without leaving their family, their community, their country. The brain drain of the last 50 years has become a brain bridge. And I see this every single day inside my own company. And the challenges are real. We should be honest about them. Time zones strain collaborations, and junior employees lose apprenticeship moments. Cybersecurity exposure grows with every endpoint. Regulation has not caught up with the workforces that cross borders by default. Those challenges are exactly why infrastructure, which we will come to, matters so much. So I welcome my other colleagues to have their own comments.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Masoud. That grounded operational perspective is invaluable. And now it's our pleasure to welcome Mr. Radu Andrian, Director of AI at Health AI, the global agency for responsible AI in health. So with over 20 years of experience driving digital change in healthcare and life sciences, Mr. Radu is a leading voice in shaping ethical, responsible AI practices that serve both people and progress. At Health AI, the spread health initiatives that bridge the gap between cutting-edge technology and sound policy, developing actionable tools, and fostering global collaboration. His mission is to ensure that AI in health is deployed safely, effectively, and above all, equitably, especially in communities that have long been left behind. It is truly a pleasure to have you with us today, Mr. Radu. And I have a question for you, please. Could you provide us with your overview on the evolving landscape of remote work, particularly through the lens of healthcare and mission-critical sectors? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar. And I'm really happy to share the spotlight with my co-panelists here. Very pleased to be with you today. So when we talk about evolving landscape of remote work, I think it's important to move beyond the idea of simply working from home. As you mentioned in your introduction, and we had a bit earlier, remote work is becoming a much broader transformation. It's changing how expertise is distributed, how organizations collaborate, how services are delivered, and how people access knowledge and support. In healthcare in particular, this is very important. So, of course, healthcare cannot become fully remote. We will always need hospitals, clinic, physical examinations, emergency care, surgery, and human presence. But many parts of healthcare can now be delivered, supported, and coordinated remotely. Telemedicine is probably the most visible example. I mean, we've gone through COVID. That's when that technology and that area of healthcare has really evolved. It allows patients to connect with healthcare professionals without always needing to travel to a hospital or clinic. This can include initial triage, follow-up consultation, chronic disease management, mental health support, medication review, and patient education. But for me, one of the most powerful aspects of telemedicine is not the convenience it brought, it's the access. In many regions, we are facing what we call medical deserts. You know, the areas where people have limited access to doctors, specialists, or healthcare facilities. This can happen in rural communities, low-resource countries, underserved urban areas, aging regions, or places where the healthcare workforce is simply too stretched. And in those contexts, remote work in healthcare becomes much more than a flexible work model. It becomes a way to redistribute scarce expertise. At least not be physically present in a local community, but through telemedicine, remote consultation, digital triage, and remote monitoring, that expertise can still reach the patient and support the local healthcare team. So instead of always moving the patient towards the healthcare system, we can start moving knowledge, data, and clinical support closer to the patient. And I think this is a major shift. It also changes the role of healthcare professionals. You know, remote care is not only about a doctor doing a video consultation from home. It can involve nurses, pharmacists, community health workers, specialists, digital care coordinator, and AI-supported tools working together in a hybrid care model. And you mentioned about, okay, hybrid is triumphant now, and I think this is what we really need to enforce. Healthcare is becoming hybrid today. For example, a patient with a chronic condition may be monitored from home, supported by a local nurse, reviewed remotely by a specialist, and escalated to a hospital only when needed. That is very different model from the traditional episodic visit that we have today. You know, we're just have an episode at home, taken with an ambulance to the emergency, and then that's where you start your journey within the hospital walls. But we also need to be careful. Telemedicine is not a magic solution. If poorly designed, it can create new inequalities. Some patients may not have internet access, digital literacy, privacy at home, or all the right devices. Sorry. Some health systems may lack reimbursement model, secure platforms, or integration with clinical workflows. So the future is not simply more remote care. The future is intentional hybrid care. So we need to ask which part of the care journey should happen remotely, which part requires physical presence, how do we keep the patient safe, how do we include those who are digitally excluded, and how do we make sure this actually improves outcomes? And I think that's the most important. We are transforming healthcare with the digitalization, but do we actually improve outcomes for everyone?
That is right.
No one is left behind. So to
Thank
summarize,
you. This is right, Rado, yes. This is right. This is very insightful. The healthcare dimension adds profound richness to this conversation, because it is a concern for all of us, and we really want, because we use AI and we are to go through this remote work, and we want really to know how it will become and how the healthcare is concerned directly. So it is really inspiring and instructive. Now introducing our third speaker, Mr. Mohammed Hussein, Chief Innovation Officer at Regents Business School. So with over 22 years of hands-on experience in community development, poverty alleviation, and NGO leadership, Mr. Hussein is a dedicated development professional. At Regent, he drives student employability and entrepreneurship through initiatives like iLead Lab and Red Hub, and he is the creator of the innovative MVP card game for aspiring entrepreneurs. Guided by his personal mission of always serving, always striving, Mr. Hussein brings a wealth of practical expertise in strategic planning, capacity building, and sustainable development to our discussion today. So welcome, Mr. Hussein, again. We are so glad to have you with us. What I would like to say, Mr. Hussein, is when we reflect on early 2020, remote work was deployed as an emergency measure. Organizations scrambled to maintain continuity amid unprecedented disruption. Yet several years later, now what began as crisis management has evolved for many into a cornerstone of strategic planning. So my question is, how has remote work evolved from a crisis response into a long-term value-driven business strategy? And in your view, what were the pivotal inflection points that transformed necessary into competitive advantage? The floor is yours, Mr. Hussein.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and to the fellow panelists and for the organizers for inviting me. I appreciate it. Yes, indeed. Let me start with firstly just vigorously nodding my head at Mr. Masood's introduction, hybrid one. We have our own understanding of what that means and how that operates in an environment outside of academia. So I'm very much in academia, and we need to train students to become graduates to go and work in the industry. And so what we're grappling with is how to get that working. But let me start by saying that probably the most important shift is that remote work has moved from being a temporary survival mechanism to becoming a strategic capability. As we all know, at the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, most organizations were not thinking about remote work as a long-term model. In fact, it almost caught us offside because we are an education provider, and ideally what we want to do is interact with our students on a face-to-face basis. However, for operational continuity, we needed to move on. And so the response was an immediate one to sort the crisis that we were in. But the question then was a very simple one: is how do we keep operating when people cannot physically come to the office? So the first phase was really about continuity, organizations moving meetings online, shifting documents into the cloud, and trying to keep communication going. But over time, something changed. What Mr. Masood talks about as a sort of the hybrid one. So organizations started to realize that remote work is not only about business continuity. They realized that they could create value and help attract talent by giving more people flexibility and attracting people who are not located near the major economic centers. In a way, it forced organizations to become more deliberate about how they structure their work. So in answering your question, I would say that the evolution happened in three phases. The first phase was an emergency remote work. That was about survival and continuity, sort of going back to COVID-19. The second phase was the hybrid experimentation. Organizations started asking questions like, which work can be done remotely, which work still needs physical presence, and how do we balance the two? And I think that balancing of the two is the key question that everyone needs to answer. And of course, the third phase is where we are now. Is it about strategic work redesign? So for example, remote work and hybrid work are no longer just flexibility. They are now linked to how organizations attract talent, improve productivity, and build resilience for the future. I could potentially hire a lecturer, a facilitator from anywhere in the world if they're agreeable to the time zones and working around the time zones. And this is what it allows us to do. And we've benefited from that as an example. So for me, the key lesson is that remote work is not just about changing the location of work. It is about redesigning work itself. It is forcing organizations to ask deeper questions about clarity, about trust, capability. Is the work clearly structured? Are people trusted to deliver outcomes rather than just be visible? And I think many people use online platforms to see, have you clocked in? Are you online? And they've really missed the mark. And finally, maybe the important question is, do you have got the skills and the tools to collaborate effectively across distance? This is especially important in higher education and business education. That's where we are at. And we are preparing graduates, as I said, for the world of work. and it requires a certain type of discipline, self-management, virtual communication, AI-enabled productivity also is something that we need to work with. If I can just conclude, so the pivotal inflection point was not simply the adoption of Zoom or Team or whatever other tools that you use. Really, it was about realization that work could be more meaningful, more digital, and more outcomes-based, or more outcomes-focused,
Yes.
rather.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank
Hossein.
you.
So
Thank you.
it's that evolution from reactive to strategic is
Correct.
precisely the lens through which forward thinking organizations are now operating. From my perspective, because I'm also managing companies and having some a very close relationship between salaries and also the clients. And the main and important thing for the client is maintaining productivity, maintaining collaboration between the team, and innovation within remote and hybrid teams. So in my view, the essential strategies for maintaining productivity, collaboration, and innovation within remote and hybrid team rest on three pillars. The first one is intentionally in communication. So this is something that we have discovered just during the COVID, because remote teams cannot rely on hallway conversations or spontaneous whiteboard sessions. They really need to have that social relationship. So leaders must architect deliberate touch points, structured check-ins, asynchronous documentation, and clarity of purpose that keep alignment alive across time zones and screens. So it's very important to find that balance. The second one is trust as operational infrastructure. Trust is very important. So micromanagement dies in distributed environment, as you know. It must be replaced by outcome-based accountability. When teams are empowered with autonomy and measured by impact rather than hours, productivity flourishes organically. The third one is adaptive leadership. So the hybrid model, this is what we need, I think, today. It demands leaders who are fluent in digital collaboration, emotionally attuned to isolation risks, and courageous enough to iterate their management style as rapidly as the technology evolves, as we are seeing today. And finally, this is not a pillar, this is something which is transverse, which is innovation, particularly requires protected space. Remote settings risk collapsing the boundary between execution and ideation. Organizations must intentionally design innovation sprints, virtual creative labs, for example, and cross-functional pods that replicate the scrumpidity of physical proximity. So in that sense, I would like to come back to Mr. Farhan Masood, bringing in, and I would like Mr. Farhan to have your spotlight about this question, please. So, or let's one or two questions. So how is your company, for example, actively supporting remote work? And could you go through your key initiatives following what just I mentioned, and the lessons learned in scaling distributed operations, please?
So first of all, I would actually agree with all three of you. It's like the different perspective, but exactly how we oversee the future of the remote work as well, as you collectively said really well. So let me answer this in two parts: how we run our own company and what we build for others. So we never adopted remote work as a temporary fix. So for us, the question was never how to get back to normal. It was how to compound the advantage. So inside Solo Insight, there are three concrete things. First, we are distributed by design and not by accident. Our commercial and customer-facing teams are in United States. Our engineering organization, more than 100 engineers, are in Pakistan, and it has been stable for years. So this stability is deliberate. In a deep technical domain like ours, the most valuable asset is accumulated domain knowledge. and retention in the markets where we are playing in, and the distributed model has protected that knowledge far better than chasing talent in overheated markets. If you look at there is actually a whole knowledge drain if you actually try to hire from United States. You're hiring from India, there is a knowledge drain because all big corporations have taken everything that you could find on the talent scale. So we were able to source talent not only from just Pakistan. We actually work with other individuals from Australia, from Canada, from London. That actually are actively contributing to our model. Second,
Great.
what we did, we have made AI the connective tissue of the distributed work. The hardest part of the remote work was never the video call. It was the context. Who decided where the documents live, what was promised to which customer. We built an internal AI operating layer over our company knowledge, our contracts, our projects, our institutional memory, so that the context follows the person rather than living in a hallway conversation someone in another time zone never heard. So the result is measured across our teams. It's a throughput multiplier of roughly 4 to 6 times the knowledge work. So I want to say that carefully, AI did not replace our people. It replaced the friction between our people. For a distributed company, that is transformational, because friction is the tax remote organizations pay. And AI lets us refuse to pay it. So if you look at the third thing that we did, we treat trust as an infrastructure internally. As you very well said, Mr. Khalid, there's basically, there is a strict access governance, structured handoffs between time zones. So work follows the sun instead of stalling overnight. And a culture of written decisions rather than meeting dependent decisions. A distributed company that writes things down is faster than a co-located company that doesn't. So now the second part, what we built. So we built for our customers, and the Cloud Gate exists because the hybrid work broke the old model of workplace access. When employees come in 2 or 3 days a week, badge, visitor flows, contractor access, the compliance, all have to become dynamic. People working from home, are they logging into, are they accessing the right information? At the same time, can we keep people working from home, making sure that the company is still SOC compliant, with all those regulations that actually exist? It was actually a dramatic, change that was happening in the industry. Even the regulators had no idea how to go after it. So we designed the tools, that actually moving the credentials into the smartphone wallet. So the badge of an employee carries is provisioned, verified, revoked digitally anywhere in the world. The moment their status changes, we can actually, even actually a little signal from the HR system, we are able to push things so that they immediately revoke access, not only from physical buildings, but also the digital documents that they are supposed to keep, confidential. For global enterprises running hybrid workforces across dozens of countries, that automation is not a convenience. It is the difference between a security posture that scales and one that quietly fails. So in a real sense, our product strategy and our remote work strategy are the same thesis. The workplace is no longer a place. It's a set of verified relationship between people and resources and a trust.
You were able, Mr. Masoud, just to turn what we had a vision maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago into execution, which is really fantastic. And congratulations for that. Returning to Mr. Rado, I would like to direct a question to you, please, that goes to the heart of some of the most complex challenges in your sector. As healthcare becomes more digital, my question is, what strategies are essential to ensure responsible AI adoption, regulatory compliance, and secure remote operations? And also another one, which is how you could please highlight the role of healthcare AI in advancing this agenda globally.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Rado. Yeah.
Thank you. I think the key point is that responsible AI adoption cannot be treated as a technical add-on. It has to become part of how healthcare organizations govern quality, safety, cybersecurity, clinical risk, and value. I'll come back to the value at the end. The first strategy to start with is the use case, not the technology. In healthcare, AI system can support diagnosis, triage, remote monitoring, as already said, documentation, workflow optimization, population health, and patient engagement. Each of these use cases carries a different level of risk. An AI tool that summarizes administrative notes is not the same as one influencing clinical decisions or prioritizing patients remotely. So organizations need a clear risk classification approach. What is the intended use? Who is affected? What happens if the system is wrong? Is there human oversight? Is the solution a medical device? Does it fall under high-risk AI regulations? The second strategy is life cycle governance. AI is not a product that you validate once and forget about it. Models can drift, clinical workflow change, especially with AI. Populations evolve and new risks appear after deployment. So we need governance across the full life cycle, from design, validation, procurement, deployment, monitoring, incident reporting, the cybersecurity, as was mentioned earlier, retraining and decommissioning. So this is especially important in remote care, where the interaction between patient, device, data, platform, clinician, and algorithm is distributed across different environments. The third strategy is regulatory readiness. Healthcare organizations need to connect AI governance with existing regulatory and compliance frameworks. Medical device regulation, where relevant, data protection, cybersecurity, clinical safety, quality management, and now AI-specific regulations, as we see in Europe with the EU AI Act. So the challenge is that many organizations still treat these as separate silos. Responsible adoption requires an integrated operational model where compliance, clinical leadership, IT, data science, procurement, legal, and the frontline team work together from the start. Fourth strategy, and I'll just go quick and stop at these, is secure remote operations. As care moves outside the hospital, the attack surface expands. Remote consultation, connected devices, cloud platforms, patients app, and AI-enabled tools all create vulnerabilities. Cybersecurity, therefore, becomes a patient safety issue. We need secure identity management, access control, encryption, audit trail, vendor assurance, data minimization, resilience planning, and clear accountability when something goes wrong. Then there is the trust and inclusion. Responsible AI is not only about avoiding harm. It's also about making sure that AI improves access, quality, equity, and outcomes. That means testing performance across different populations, involving patient and clinician, ensuring explainability where needed, and being transparent about what AI can do or cannot do. And then coming to health AI, what do we do in that space? Then we play an important role in assuring responsible AI governance. So we help move responsible AI from principles to practice. We support countries, regulator, and health system in building the capacity to govern AI in health responsibly. That includes regulatory readiness, institutional maturity, country-level assessment, global knowledge sharing, and practical tools to help stakeholders understand where they are and what they need to strengthen. So for me, health AI's role is especially important because AI governance cannot be solved by one hospital, one company, or one regulator alone. Healthcare AI is an ecosystem challenge, so we need common expectations, shared learnings, regulatory convergence, and implementation support, particularly for countries and health systems with fewer resources.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rado. This is actually like it's a framework. It's responsible, ethical, and secure, which is perfectly what we are expecting for healthcare demands. Moving back to Mr. Mohammed Hussein. So please, Mr. Hussein, I have a question about the digital tools and platforms. So how do digital tools and platforms and infrastructure enable productivity, collaboration, and culture in distributed work environments? Please.
Yeah, I think the starting point is understanding that digital tools is not strategy. They are infrastructure that allows strategy to work. In fact, many organizations make that mistake of thinking that if they have video meetings and cloud storage, etc., their problems of remote work is solved. tools alone do not create productivity, and I'm sure everyone on this chat will agree with me. Video conferencing platform cannot create trust, just as a project management tool cannot create accountability by itself. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that it's not really about having digital tools. It's about an organization's digital maturity. That means that the tools and the processes and the people and the performance, all of these systems need to be aligned. And if you allow me, I will just think of three sort of ways of thinking of this, right? So one is productivity is the first layer of what we're trying to achieve. So digital tools support productivity when they create clarity. A project management platform, as I said, can help a team see who is doing what. Dashboards can help leaders track the process. And I suppose AI or AI tools can support tasks like drafting and summarization, etc. But the important point is that these tools only work when organization is clear about the work itself. And I think you mentioned
Yes.
a little bit earlier about maturity and trust and responsibility. So people need to know what the goal is, what their role is, what their timeline is, and all of these can be measured. The second
Yes.
one, if you allow me, is on collaboration. Is the physical workplace collaboration, in the physical workplace rather, collaboration often happens informally. You walk past someone's desk, you talk at the water fountain, in the coffee station, and this is an important aspect of what happens in an in-person environment. How do you find that how do you replicate that in an online environment? And finally, it's an issue of culture. For me, this is probably the human side, the most important part, the human side of remote work. In the physical work, you can pick up culture through observation, informal conversation. And I think many people in this group take that for granted. The culture that we've developed of being on time, of delivering on time, etc., we've picked up because of our in-person interaction with people. But in a remote work environment, that's going to be very difficult. How are you going to teach people culture when it's seen with suspicion? You have to clock in, you have to be observed, etc. So the need to feel included is part and parcel of what we must try and achieve in an online environment if we want a culture of responsibility to permeate the entire institution.
Yes, that emphasis on intentionality in technology selection is critical. Tools must serve, as I understand, it must serve strategy, not dictate it. So this is very important to underline. Thank you very much, Mr. Hussein. So what I think also is that to add what all our valuable speakers explained before, I would like just to mention that the most significant opportunities and most complex challenges, particularly in traditional and operationally intensive sectors, reveal a fascinating paradox of transformation. So in my view, the opportunity lies in the democratization of talent and reimagining of physical assets. Traditional industries, manufacturing, logistics, energy, agriculture, finance, and etc., have long been constrained by geography in their workforce planning. And we saw that, by the way, during the COVID. So remote and hybrid models now enable these sectors to access specialized expertise globally, as Mr. I think Rad also mentioned before, and a petroleum, for example, engineer in Calgary, collaborating with a data scientist in Bangalore, a quality assurance specialist monitoring production lines across 3 continents from a single dashboard. So this is really fantastic. Furthermore, legacy physical infrastructure, factories, warehouses, field sites can be augmented with digital twins. We know all of us how digital twins transforms also the way we are working. So IoT, telemetry, and remote operation centers transforming sunk costs into intelligence adaptive ecosystems. So consider the case of, for example, Siemens, where remote monitoring and AI-driven quality control have achieved defect rates below 0.001% while enabling distributed engineering teams to optimize production in real time. Or what John Deere's precision architecture platform they were able to do, where agronomists remotely guide farmers across continents using satellite imagery and sensor data, turning traditional machinery into connected consultative services. So, but what is the challenge? The challenge is the inertia of operational culture and the complexity of hybrid physical digital workflows. This is where I'm seeing the challenge. In sectors where safety, compliance, and hands-on execution are non-negotiable, remote work cannot simply replicate office-based models. The challenge is designing context-aware flexibility, roles that must be physically present require thoughtful rotation, on-site digital enablement, and immersive remote support through AI, for example, and VR. The greater hurdle, however, is cultural, I think. Organizations with decades of hierarchical presence-based management must unlearn deeply embedded assumptions about supervision, productivity measurement, and team cohesion. And as a last example, Toyota's hybrid manufacturing model. It illustrates this tension well. They have successfully deployed remote diagnostics and centralized planning, yet struggle to replicate the tacit knowledge transfer of their legendary GEMAWorks on-site observation in virtual environments. So similarly, healthcare system, like Mr. Radu said, adopting remote patient monitoring face not technological barriers, but regulatory fragmentation, clinicians resistance, and because they will resist to that technology, and the ethical, of course, complexity of remote care for vulnerable populations. So this is what I'm seeing as a challenge. And at the time, I'd like to remind our participants that if you have any questions, please share them on the chat box so that we may ask them to in our Q&A session, please. So don't forget that. It's you can just go there and put your questions there. So now moving back to Mr. Farhan Masood to explore the foundational layer, because all of the strategy, leadership, and culture we have discussed depends on something very practical, which is the infrastructure. A lot of people, they forget about that. So according to you, Mr. Farhan, what is the role of infrastructure in accelerating remote work, and how can organizations prioritize investments to build resilient and scalable digital foundations?
Yeah, so this question for me is the heart of the entire discussion. Infrastructure is not critical to scaling remote work. Infrastructure is the ceiling on it. No country, no company, and no worker can rise above the infrastructure beneath them. So digital infrastructure is the obvious one, but I would push past bandwidth. It's an old question. Yes, connectivity matters. You can't join the global workforce on an unreliable connection. But a deeper digital foundation is verified digital identity. Remote work runs on trust as a distance. And trust at a distance requires identity. You can prove that this worker, this credential, this device is genuine. Countries investing in national digital identity rails, interoperable credentials, and secure authentication are quietly building the ramp on for their citizens into the global remote economy. Countries that do not will watch the opportunity pass by, no matter how talented their people are. So regulatory infrastructure is where I see the most friction today. I live this directly. So my company handles identity data for multinational customers, so which means a single deployment can fall under European GDPR, Swiss data protection law, CGPA, and half a dozen other regimes at once. So we invest heavily in certifications, audit rights, data protection frameworks, because our customers rightly demand them. So here's my honest view. That burden is heavy, but it also the trust layer that makes cross-border work possible at all. So if you actually have all that, in your infrastructure, all of those certifications, all of those data processes and workflows in play, they would actually make the remote work possible. And when every jurisdiction defines data residency, employment status, and taxation differently, the cost lands hardest on small companies and on workers in developing economies. The very people, remote work should be empowering. The equitable path to harmonization, mutual recognition of credentials, clearer cross-border employment frameworks, and data protection regimes that interoperate. I think organizations like ICCD, which convene across so many member economies, are exactly the kind of institutions that can push that harmonization forward. And operational infrastructure is the layer companies themselves must build. Management practices for distributed teams, whether it's structured documentation, asynchronous decision-making, and yes, the physical layer too, because hybrid means the office must now just itself as a destination with seamless access and a smart visitor management space that serves collaboration rather than attendance.
Yes.
The companies that treat these as deliberate investments are turning remote work into an advantage. The companies that treat them as an afterthought are experiencing remote work as a decay. So on equity, one more sentence because it matters. If we get the infrastructure right, remote work becomes the most powerful development tool of this decade. Moving income directly to the talent where it lives. If we get it wrong, remote work becomes one more privilege of those already connected. The difference between those outcomes is infrastructure, which means the difference is a choice.
Yeah, so it's just to resume, when done right, it becomes invisible. When done wrong, it becomes the bottleneck. So an infrastructure is an enabler of transformation. That's what we understand from your words.
And the right infrastructure. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So returning to Mr. Radu, let's now explore the intersection of remote work, artificial intelligence, and global collaboration, particularly through the lens of healthcare, when these conversions carries enormous implications. So how will remote work, AI governance, and cross-border digital collaboration reshape leadership models and operational structures across the healthcare industry? Mr. Radu.
Yeah, thanks. I think healthcare leadership is really profoundly reshaped by remote work, AI governance, and cross-border digital collaboration. I mean, historically, healthcare leadership has been highly institution-based. Hospital, regulator, pharma companies, medtech organization, the payer, and then public health agencies often operate within their own boundaries. But digital health and AI are breaking those boundaries. Data, expertise, algorithms, care pathways, and regulatory expectation now move across organizations and across borders. So the leadership model has to evolve from command and control to orchestration. Leaders will increasingly need to coordinate ecosystem rather simply manage departments. For example, a remote care pathway may involve a hospital, a technology provider, a payer, a regulator, a cloud partner, community health worker, and patients using devices at home. So no single actor controls the whole system. So leadership, therefore, becomes about alignment, trust, accountability, and shared value. The second shift is from innovation leadership to governance leadership. In the past, many digital health initiatives were driven as pilots. Test the app, run the proof of concept, show that it works. But with AI, the real leadership challenge starts after deployment. Leaders must ensure that systems remain safe, compliant, secure, clinically useful, and equitable over time. And this over time is what's really changing today. That requires new operating structures, AI governance boards, clinical safety committees, data stewardship function, model monitoring processes, vendor oversight, cybersecurity escalation pathways, and a clear accountability of human oversight. So the third shift is from local operations to distributed operation. Remote work has shown that healthcare expertise does not always need to be physically located where the patient is or the institution is. This can help address workforce shortage and medical deserts, as I mentioned in the introduction, but it also requires new operational models. So we will see more virtual care teams, regional specialty hubs, remote command centers, and AI-supported triage, and hybrid care pathways where digital and physical services are integrated around the patient journey. Then another shift is really from siloed decision-making to cross-functional leadership. AI in health care cannot be led only by IT, only by clinicians, or only by compliance team. It requires collaboration between clinical leaders, data scientists, legal team, cybersecurity, all the stakeholders. So the best leader will be translators, people who can connect medical value, technical feasibility, regulatory requirements, financial sustainability, and patient trust. So I think this is particularly important for organizations working across pharma, medtech, clinical research, hospital. Cross-border digital collaboration can accelerate learning, reduce duplication, and improve access, but it also requires stronger governance, common standards, transparency evidence,
it's both.
Shared risk management, yes, and mutual trust.
So it's both, Mr. Rado, it's both compelling and actionable, which is a very good vision. Let's go back now to Mr. Hussein. We have explored opportunities with ambition. Now let us focus more on challenges. In your assessment, what are the most pressing operational, cultural, and strategic challenges organizations face in scaling remote and hybrid work models?
Yeah, you asked some on point questions. I think the themes that you've used are correct. So the first I would suppose is operational, right? So remote work, as we know, depends on reliable access, secure systems, and clear workflows, etc. But in many organizations, people are dealing with too many disconnected platforms and too many unnecessary meetings. And we're trying to digitize communication and forget that redesigning of the workflow is where it needs to happen. That is where remote work like really feels chaotic. The second, I suppose, would be cultural, as you identified. For me, the first cultural challenge is trust. Some managers are still more comfortable managing people than that they can see physically, rather than sort of, in absence. So remote work becomes a challenge for them. And if performance depends on visibility, remote work will always be viewed with suspicion, especially on the person that's been watched. The second issue that goes with this, I suppose, is remote workers can feel safe when they're left alone, and they feel left out when they're not part of the conversation. This talks to culture. Again, we assume that because you are remote, you are not here, you don't need to be in the know. You just need to know what needs to be known, and everything else, is managed by the seniors or the bosses. The third issue relating to culture is probably about mentorship, and I mentioned that a little bit earlier. I think we're taking for granted the value of mentorship for in-person connectivity. And again, coming from an educational background, academic background, I'm fearful of where our graduates are going to be in the next few years, because they're going to miss this very vital early career opportunity of observation, feedback, body language, etc., which you not be able to get from an online presence. And I'm a bit fearful about where that goes, but maybe that's what we need to be alert to. And maybe the last and the third strategic area is treating remote work as a one-size-fits-all policy. Let's agree that not every role, not every sector, not every employee group has the same needs. In fact, one of the things that we're struggling with, by the way, we haven't gone remote post-COVID. We've come back to campus, and largely because there's a trust issue between ourselves and our employees, and the trust issue is both ways. So organizations need to make three strategitic choices. First, they need to decide which work suits hybrid or remote. Second, they need to figure out what does fairness look like. And thirdly, they need to build leadership capability, because managing distributed teams requires a different level of trust and clarity and communication.
Yes. And I believe we are moving toward a world where remote work dissolves as a distinct category and becomes simply work, seamless. So I think also what we are entering into the era of the fluid enterprise, where physical and digital presence are not opposing choices, but interchangeable modalities selected based on task, context, and individual circumstances. The office will not disappear, I think. It will be replatformed. It will be transformed from a mandatory container of productivity into a curated destination for collaboration, culture, and connection, visited with intention rather than obligation. So thank you very much, Mr. Hussein. I would like just to hear maybe three forces that will define the future of remote work. So what I would like to add first is the ambient intelligence. AI will become the invisible infrastructure of distributed work, anticipating information needs, automating routine coordination, and surfacing insights across asynchronous workflows. The second is the outcome sovereignty. The measurement of work will complete its shift from input to impact. Hours locked will become maybe as relevant as physical location, and professionals will be evaluated on a contribution you created from performative presence and enabling gaining work-life integration. And the last one, I'm thinking about a global talent arbitrage with local responsibility. So organizations will access expertise without borders, yet must cultivate belonging, equity, and ethical accountability across distributed footprints. So the future belongs to enterprises that can be simultaneously globally agile and locally rooted, hiring talent in Nairobi, Nashville, or Moscow, while ensuring fair opportunity, cultural inclusion, and sustainable community impact. So now I invite our distinguished panelists to share their own perspectives on the remote of work. So let's start with you, Mr. Hussein. How are you seeing the future of remote work?
Sorry, just quick. Yeah, I want to take on from where you sort of left off. And said, personally, I don't think the future of work will be fully remote for everyone. And I also acknowledge that we will not return to the old office, as you said, so it will have to be a fluid relationship between where work gets done and how work gets done. And while it may sound obvious, but I think the future will be adaptive in that organizations will need to match the work model to the nature of the work, the needs of the employees, the strategic goals of the organizations, and the maturity of the team. I would have liked to talk more on the last point, the maturity of the team, as I think that they bear greater responsibility, or rather a great responsibility in this relationship when it comes to work. And I say that because remote and hybrid work has a special responsibility on teams. The maturity of a team member and how they manage their time, how they communicate clearly, support one another, and deliver without constant supervision. And a less mature team member may need more structure, more guidance, and more face-to-face engagement. And I'm not sure whether the workforce is ready for that type. The culture of being under constant supervision is still very much part of the psyche of a typical employee. So some work will happen very effectively remotely, and some work will still benefit from physical presence. And much of the future will sit somewhere between, as you said, where teams move between physical and digital spaces depending on the task. And of course, we must acknowledge that all work will be strongly shaped by AI. Yes. I think we cannot ignore that, So the remote work conversation will no longer be about where, it will be about how we work alongside intelligent digital system, ensuring workplace remains ethical, responsible, and human-centered.
Right.
I can think of a five-part or a 5-point framework, if you allow me, and I'll just give the headings, and if you want at the end, I can elaborate a bit more on that. The one is, suit the purpose? What is the purpose for it? The second is the platform. What tools support the work? The third would be process. How does the work flow? The fourth is people. Are employees trained and monitored, etc.? And the fifth is performance. How is success measured? And I think if organizations get these 5 elements right, remote work can become more than a flexible arrangement. It can become the driver of transformation. And from a higher education perspective, it leaves us with a challenge about how do we prepare students for a different type of work from what their lecturers and their professors were trained in and come from. And so graduates will need this type of digital fluency, AI literacy, etc., etc. Yeah, let me leave it at that for now.
And thank you very much, Mr. Hussein. Mr. Radu, same question. How do you see the future of remote working?
Well, I'd look back to what was said at the very beginning. Hybrid wins. I think it's quite patent today, and we must look at it in the perspective of it's not one model. The first phase of remote work was mostly about location. Can people work from home? Can meetings happen online? Can service continue when teams are not physically together? But the next phase, and we talked about that, is much more strategic. It's about redesigning how we work, expertise, data, and decision-making flow across organizations. And in healthcare, I mean, it's not just about remote or physical. I mean, there will always be a physical part in healthcare. People need to see patients. But which part of the care journey should happen where, by whom, and with what digital support? So the future of remote work is not only about patient care, it's also about how healthcare organizations operate. You know, pharma companies, medtech, hospitals, regulators will increasingly collaborate across borders through digital platforms, shared data spaces, virtual expert networks, and AI-enabled workflows. So for me, the biggest change is that remote work will become less about flexibility and more about resilience and access. It can help organizations attract talent, reduce bottlenecks, I mean, we mentioned that, connect scarce expertise to where it is needed, and create more agile operating models. At the same time, we need to keep a realistic eye on remote work, because remote work can create new inequalities if some people lack connectivity, digital literacy, privacy at home, or access to devices. So it can also create cybersecurity risk, fragmentation, and loss of human connection if poorly designed. So the future will not be remote work everywhere. I mean, you mentioned it really strongly, Mohammed.
Yes.
It will be intentional remote work, so designed around value, trust, security, inclusion, and outcome. So in healthcare, I would summarize it in this way, if I can. So the future of remote work is not the disappearance of hospital and clinic or the office. It's the emergence of a more distributed healthcare system where expertise can travel digitally, care can extend beyond walls, and team can collaborate across institutions and borders. And that's a big ask, we'd say, because we know the reality today that each hospital, you know, they keep their silos. So we are pushing really those boundaries. But the winner will be the organization that do not simply digitize all the ways of working, but they redesign work itself around people, purpose, and value.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Radu. This is inspiring, and thank you for that. What about you, Mr. Masood?
Yeah, first of all, it's like I agree with all three of you. It's like totally aligned on you know, how we actually look at this the future coming, and it's like let me offer 3 predictions and then a conviction. First, the word remote will disappear. You know, when was the last time you said a remote server? When was the last time, you know, we said remote electricity or remote banking? You know, it's like this thing will actually, within a few years, work will simply assume distribution the way it now assumes the internet. And the office will be reframed as one node in a network of workplaces rather than the default. So the organization still debating remote versus office in 2030 will be the ones losing. Second, the AI augmented worker changes the geography of opportunity again, right? The next phase is not just working from anywhere. It is each person operating with an AI layer that carries their context, drafts their work, bridges their language. And I have watched AI compress the distance between a manager in the US and an engineer in Lahore more effectively than any flight ever did. So the language barriers, documentation gaps, the time zone friction all shrink. That widens the doorway for talent from every member economy represented in the audience, right? And the third, the trust becomes the defining workplace technology. As work distributes and AI generates more of it, the premium question becomes, who did this? Are they who they claim? And are they entitled to what they are touching? A verified identity for people and increasingly for AI agents acting on their behalf becomes the foundation under everything. The badge of the future is not plastic. It is a portable cryptographic identity that follows you across employers, borders, and buildings. And my conviction, the future of remote work is not about where we work. It is about who gets to participate in the global economy. For the first time, the answer can genuinely be anyone with a talent, a connection, and a verifiable identity. Building that future, the rails of trust beneath it, is the work my company has chosen. I believe it is some of the most consequential infrastructure work of our time. I'm looking forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Masoud. This is a truly compelling horizon. Ladies and gentlemen, as we draw today's session to a close, I want to acknowledge the energy and insight you have brought to this conversation over the past hour. Your expertise, your organizational realities, and your visions for the future have transformed this dialogue from a presentation into a true exchange. On behalf of the Islamic Chamber of Commerce and Development, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished speakers, Mr. Farhan Masoud, Founder, President, and Chief AI Officer of Solar Insight Inc., Mr. Rado Andrian, Director of AI at Health AI, the Global Agency for Responsible AI in Health, and Mr. Mahmoud Hussein, Chief Innovation Officer at Regent Business School. The insights shared today were truly inspiring and incredibly thought-provoking. To everyone joining us, please continue the journey by following ICCD official channels for updates on upcoming webinar activities and opportunities to shape a more inclusive, innovation, sustainable economic future. Thank you for all being here, for your engagement, and for your commitment to leading with this purpose. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you.